Chapter 28, a chapter on unicorn hunting. None in Earl was so busy but that he came that morning to see the magic that was newly come out of Elfland, and to compare the trolls with all that the neighbors said of them. And the folk of Earl gazed much at the trolls, and the trolls at the folk of Earl, and there was great merriment. For, as often happens with minds of unequal weight, each laughed at the other. And the villagers found the impudent ways of the bare, brown, nimble trolls no funnier, no more meet for derision, than the trolls found the grave high hats, the curious clothes, and the solemn air of the villagers. And Orion soon came too, and the folk of the village doffed their long, thin hats, and, though the trolls would have laughed at him also, Lirulu had found his whip, and by means of it made the mob of his impudent brethren give that salutation that is given in Elfland to those of its royal line. When noonday came, which was the hour of dinner, and the folk turned from the kennels, they went back to their houses, all praising the magic that was come at last to Earl. During the days that followed, Orion's hounds learned that it was vain to chase a troll and unwise to snarl at one, for, apart from their elvish speed, the trolls were able to leap into the air far over the heads of the hounds, and when each had been given a whip, they could repay snarling with an aim that none on earth was able to equal, except those whose sires had carried a whip with hounds for generations. And one morning Orion came to the pigeon loft and called to Lirulu early, and he brought out the trolls, and they went to the kennels, and Orion opened the doors, and he led them all away eastwards over the downs. The hounds moved all together, and the trolls with their whips ran beside them, like a flock of sheep surrounded by numbers of collies. They were away to the border of Elfland to wait for the unicorns where they come through the twilight to eat the earthly grasses at evening. And as our evening began to mellow the fields we know, they were come to the opal border that shut those fields from Elfland, and there they lurked as earth's darkness grew, and waited for the great unicorns. Each hound had its troll beside it, with the troll's right hand along its shoulder or neck, soothing it, calming it, and holding it still, while the left hand held the whip. The strange group lingered there motionless, and darkened there with the evening. And when earth was as dim and quiet as the unicorns desired, the great creatures came softly through, and were far into earth before any troll would allow his hound to move. Thus, when Orion gave the signal, they easily cut one off from its elfin home, and hunted it snorting over those fields that are the portion of men. And night came down on the proud beast's magical gallop, and the hounds intoxicate with that marvelous scent, and the leaping, soaring trolls. And when jackdaws on the highest towers of Earl saw the rim of the sun all red above frosted fields, Orion came back from the downs with his hounds and his trolls, carrying as fine a head as a unicorn hunter could wish. The hounds, weary but glad, were soon curled up in their kennels, and Orion in his bed, while the trolls in their pigeon loft began to feel, as none but Lirulu had felt ever before, the weight and the weariness of the passing of time. All day Orion slept, and all his hounds, none of them caring how it slept or why, while the trolls slept anxiously, falling asleep as fast as ever they could, in the hope of escaping some of the fury of time, which they feared had begun to attack them. And that evening, while still they slept, hounds, trolls, and Orion, there met again in the forge of Gnarl the parliament of Earl. From the forge to the inner room came the 12 old men, rubbing their hands and smiling, ruddy with health and the keen north wind and the cheerfulness of their forebodings. For they were well content at last that their lord was surely magic, and foresaw great doings in Earl. Folklings, said Gnarl to them all, naming them thus after an ancient wont. Is it not well with us and our valley at last? See how it is as we planned so long ago. For our lord is a magic lord as we all desired, and magical things have sought him from over there, and they all obey his hests. It is so, said all but Gazik, a vendor of beeves. Little and old and out of the way was Earl, secluded in its deep valley, unnoticed in history, and the 12 men loved the place and would have it famous. And now they rejoiced as they heard the words of Gnarl. What other village, he said, has traffic with over there? And Gazik, though he rejoiced with the rest, rose up in a pause of their gladness. Many strange things, he said, have entered our village, coming from over there, and it may be that human folk are best, and the ways of the fields we know. Oth scorned him and Threll. Magic is best, said all. And Gazik was silent again, and raised his voice no more against the many. And the mead went round, and all spoke of the fame of Earl, and Gazik forgot his mood and the fear that was in it. Far into the night they rejoiced, quaffing the mead, and by its homely aid gazing into the years of the future, so far as that may be done by the eyes of men. Yet all their rejoicing was hushed and their voices low, lest the ears of the freer should hear them, for their gladness came to them from lands that lay beyond thought of salvation, and they had set their trust in magic, against which, as well they knew, boomed every note that rang from the bell of the freer whenever it tolled at evening. And they parted late, praising magic in no loud tones, and went secretly back to their houses, for they feared the curse that the freer had called down upon unicorns, and knew not if their own names might become involved in one of the curses called upon magical things. All the next day Orion rested his hounds, and the trolls and the people of Earl gazed at each other. But on the day that followed, Orion took his sword and gathered his band of trolls and his pack of hounds, and all were away once more far over the downs, to come again to the border of nebulous opal, and to lurk for the unicorns coming through in the evening. They came to a part of the border far from the spot which they had disturbed only 3 evenings before, and Orion was guided by the chattering trolls, for well they knew the haunts of the lonely unicorns. And Earth's evening came huge and hushed, till all was dim as the twilight, and never a footfall did they hear of the unicorns, never a glimpse of their whiteness. And yet the trolls had guided Orion well, for just as he would have despaired of a hunt that night, just when the evening seemed wholly and utterly empty, a unicorn stood on the earthward edge of the twilight, where nothing had stood only a moment before. Soon he moved slowly across the terrestrial grasses, a few yards forward into the fields of men. Another followed, moving a few yards also, and then they stood for 15 of our earthly minutes, moving nothing at all except their ears. And all that while the trolls hushed every hound, motionless under a hedge of the fields we know. Darkness had all but hidden them, when at last the unicorns moved, and as soon as the largest was far enough from the frontier, the trolls let loose every hound and ran with them after the unicorn, with shrill yells of derision, all sure of his haughty head. But the quick, small minds of the trolls, though they had learned much of earth, had not yet understood the irregularity of the moon. Darkness was new to them, and they soon lost hounds. Orion, in his eagerness to hunt, had made no choice of a suitable night. There was no moon at all, and would be none till near morning. Soon he also fell behind. Orion easily collected the trolls. The night was full of their frivolous noises, and the trolls came to his horn, but not a hound would leave that pungent, magical scent for any horn of man. They straggled back next day, tired, having lost their unicorn. And while each troll cleaned and fed his hound on the evening after the hunt, and laid a little bunch of straw for it on which to lie down, and smoothed its hair and looked for thorns in its feet, and unraveled burrs from its ears, Lirulu sat alone, fastening his small, sharp intelligence, like the little white light of a burning glass, for hours upon one question. The question that Lirulu pondered far into the night was how to hunt unicorns with dogs in the darkness. And by midnight, a plan was clear in his elvish mind. Chapter 29. The Luring of the People of the Marshes. As the evening that followed was beginning to fade, a traveler might have been seen approaching the marshes, which some way southeastwards of Earl lay along the edge of the farmsteads and stretched their terrible waste as far as the skyline, and even over the border and into the region of Elfland. They glimmered now as the light was leaving the land. So black were the solemn clothes and the high, grave hat of the traveler that he could have been seen from far against the dim green of the fields, going down to the edge of the marsh through the gray evening. But none were there to see at such an hour beside that desolate place, for the threat of darkness was already felt in the fields, and all the cows were home, and the farmers warm in their houses. So the traveler walked alone, and soon he was come by unsure paths to the reeds and the thin rushes, to which a wind was telling tales that have no meaning to man, long histories of bleakness and ancient legends of rain. While on the high darkening land far off behind him he saw lights begin to blink where the houses were. He walked with the gravity and the solemn air of one who has important business with men, yet his back was turned to their houses, and he went where no man wandered, traveling towards no hamlet or lonely cottage of man, for the marsh ran right into Elfland. Between him and the nebulous border that divides earth from Elfland, there was no man whatever, and yet the traveler walked on as one that has a grave errand. With every venerable step that he took, bright mosses shook, and the marsh seemed about to engulf him, while his worthy staff sank deep into slime, giving him no support. And yet the traveler seemed only to care for the solemnity of his pacing. Thus he went on over the deadly marsh with a deportment suitable to the slow procession when the elders open the market on special days, and the gravest blesses the bargaining, and all the farmers come to the booths and barter. And up and down, songbirds went wavering home, skirting the marsh's edge on their way to their native hedges. Pigeons passed landward to roost in high, dark trees. The last of a multitude of rooks was gone, and all the air was empty. And now the great marsh thrilled to the news of the coming of a stranger, for no sooner had the traveler gravely set a foot on one of those brilliant mosses that bloom in the pools than a thrill shot under their roots and below the stems of the bulrushes, and ran like a light beneath the surface of the water, or like the sound of a song, and passed far over the marshes, and came quivering to the border of magical twilight that divides Elfland from earth, and stayed not there, but troubled the very border, and passed beyond it, and was felt in Elfland. For where the great marshes run down to the border of earth, the frontier is thinner and more uncertain than elsewhere. And as soon as they felt that thrill in the deep of the marshes, the will-o'-the-wisps soared up from their fathomless homes and waved their lights to beckon the traveler on, over the quaking mosses at the hour when the duck were flighting. And under that whir and rush and rejoicing of wings that the ducks make in that hour, the traveler followed after the waving lights, further and further into the marshes. Yet sometimes he turned from them, so that for a while they followed him, instead of leading as they were accustomed to do, till they could get round in front of him and lead him once more. A watcher, if there had been one in such bad light and in such a perilous place, had noticed after a while in the venerable traveler's movements a queer resemblance to those of the hen-green plover when she lures the stranger after her in spring, away from the mossy bank where her eggs lie bare. Or perhaps such a resemblance is merely fanciful, and a watcher might have noticed no such thing. At any rate, on that night, in that desolate place, there was no watcher whatever. And the traveler followed his curious course, sometimes towards the dangerous mosses, sometimes towards the safe green land, always with grave demeanor and reverent gait. And the will-o'-the-wisps in multitudes gathered about him, and still that deep thrill that warned the marsh of a stranger throbbed on through the ooze below the roots of the rushes, and did not cease, as it should as soon as the stranger was dead, but haunted the marsh like some echo of music that magic has made everlasting, and troubled the will-o'-the-wisps even over the border in Elfland. Now, it is far from my intention to write anything detrimental to will-o'-the-wisps, or anything that may be construed as being a slight upon them. No such construction should be put upon my writings. But it is well known that the people of the marshes lure travelers to their doom, and have delighted to follow that avocation for centuries, and I may be permitted to mention this in no spirit of disapproval. The will-o'-the-wisps then that were about this traveler redoubled their efforts with fury, and when still he eluded their last enticements, only on the very edge of the deadliest pools, and still lived and still traveled, and the whole marsh knew of it, then the greater will-o'-the-wisps that dwell in Elfland rose up from their magical mire and rushed over the border, and the whole marsh was troubled. Almost like little moons grown nimbly impudent, the people of the marshes glowed before that solemn traveler, leading his reverend steps to the edge of death, only to retrace their steps again to beckon him back once more. And then, in spite of the great height of his hat and the dark length of his coat, that frivolous people began to perceive that mosses were bearing his weight, which never before had supported any traveler. At this their fury increased, and they all leaped nearer to him, and nearer they flocked wherever he went, and in their fury their enticements were losing their craftiness. And now a watcher in the marshes, if such there had been, had seen something more than a traveler surrounded by will-o'-the-wisps, for he might have noticed that the traveler was almost leading them, instead of the will-o'-the-wisps leading the traveler. And in their impatience to have him dead, the people of the marshes had never thought that they were all coming nearer and nearer to the dry land. And when all was dark but the water, they suddenly found themselves in a field of grass, with their feet rasping against the rough pasture, while the traveler was seated with his knees gathered up to his chin and was eyeing them from under the brim of his high black hat. Never before had any of them been lured to dry land by traveler, and there were amongst them that night those eldest and greatest among them who had come with their moon-like lights right over the border from Elfland. They looked at each other in uneasy astonishment as they dropped limply onto the grass, for the roughness and heaviness of the solid land oppressed them after the marshes. And then they began to perceive that the venerable traveler whose bright eyes watched them so keenly out of that black mass of clothes was little larger than they were themselves, in spite of his reverend airs. Indeed, though stouter and rounder, he was not quite so tall. Who was this, they began to mutter, who had lured will-o'-the-wisps? And some of those elders from Elfland went up to him that they might ask him with what audacity he had dared to lure such as them. And then the traveler spoke. Without rising or turning his head, he spoke where he sat. "People of the marshes," he said, "do you love unicorns?" And at the word unicorns, scorn and laughter filled every tiny heart in all that frivolous multitude, excluding all other emotions, so that they forgot their petulance at having been lured, although to lure will-o'-the-wisps is held by them to be the gravest of insults, and never would they have forgiven it if they had had longer memories. At the word unicorns, they all giggled in silence, and this they did by flickering up and down like the light of a little mirror flashed by an impudent hand. Unicorns! Little love had they for the haughty creatures. Let them learn to speak to the people of the marshes when they came to drink at their pools. Let them learn to give their due to the great lights of Elfland, and the lesser lights that illumined the marshes of earth. "No," said an elder of the will-o'-the-wisps, "none loves the proud unicorns." "Come then," said the traveler, "and we will hunt them. And you shall light us in the night with your lights, when we hunt them with dogs over the fields of men." "Venerable traveler," said that elder will-o'-the-wisp. But at those words the traveler flung up his hat and leaped from his long black coat and stood before the will-o'-the-wisps stark naked. And the people of the marshes saw that it was a troll that had tricked them. Their anger at this was slight, for the people of the marshes have tricked the trolls, and the trolls have tricked the people of the marshes, each of them so many times for ages and ages, that only the wisest among them can say which has tricked the other most, and is how many tricks ahead. They consoled themselves now by thinking of times when trolls had been made to look ludicrous, and consented to come with their lights to help to hunt unicorns, for their wills were weak when they stood on the dry land, and they easily acquiesced in any suggestion or followed anyone's whim. It was Larulu who had thus tricked the will-o'-the-wisps, knowing well how they loved to lure travelers, and, having obtained the highest hat and gravest coat he could steal, he had set out with a bait that he knew would bring them from great distances. Now that he had gathered them all on the solid land, and had their promise of light and help against unicorns, which such creatures will give easily on account of the unicorn's pride. He began to lead them away to the village of Earl, slowly at first, while their feet grew accustomed to the hard land, and over the fields he brought them limping to Earl. And now there was nothing in all the marshes that at all resembled man, and the geese came down on a huge tumult of wings. The little swift teals shot home, and all the dark air twanged with the flight of the duck. Chapter 30. The Coming of Too Much Magic. In Earl that had sighed for magic, there was indeed magic now. The pigeon loft and old lumber lofts over stables were all full of trolls. The ways were full of their antics, and lights bobbed up and down the street at night long after traffic was home. For the will-o'-the-wisps would go dancing along the gutters, and had made their homes round the soft edges of duck ponds and in green-black patches of moss that grew upon oldest thatch. And nothing seemed the same in the old village. And amongst all these magical folk, the magical half of Orion's blood, that had slept while he went amongst earthly men, hearing mundane talk each day, stirred out of its sleep and awakened long sleeping thoughts in his brain. And the elfin horns that he often heard blowing at evening blew with a meaning now, and blew stronger as though they were nearer. The folk of the village, watching their lord by day, saw his eyes turned away towards Elfland, saw him neglecting the wholesome earthly cares, and at night there came the queer lights and the gibbering of the trolls. A fear settled on Earl. At this time the Parliament took counsel again, 12 grey-beard quaking men that had come to the house of Gnarl when their work was ended at evening, and all the evening was weird with the new magic of Elfland. Every man of them, as he ran from his own warm house on his way to the forge of Gnarl, had seen lights leaping, or heard voices gibbering, which were of no Christum land. And some had seen shapes prowling which were of no earthly growing, and they feared that all manner of things had slipped through the border of Elfland to come and visit the trolls. They spoke low in their parliament. All told the same tale, a tale of children terrified, a tale of women demanding the old ways again, and as they spoke they eyed window and crevice, none knowing what might come. And Oth said, "Let us folk go to the Lord Orion as we went to his grandfather in his long red room. Let us say how we sought for magic, and lo, we have magic enough. And let him follow no more after witchery, nor the things that are hidden from man." He listened acutely, standing there amongst his hushed comrade neighbors. Was it goblin voices that mocked him, or was it only echo? Who could say? And almost at once the night all around was hushed again. And Threll said, "Nay, it is too late for that." Threll had seen their lord one evening standing alone on the downs, all motionless and listening to something sounding from Elfland, with his eyes to the east as he listened. And nothing was sounding, not a noise was astir. Yet Orion stood there called by things beyond mortal hearing. "It is too late now," said Threll, and that was the fear of all. Then Guhic rose slowly up and stood by that table, and trolls were gibbering like bats away in their loft, and the pale marsh lights were flickering, and shapes prowled in the dark. The pit-pat of their feet came now and then to the ears of the 12 that were there in that inner room. And Guhic said, We wished for a little magic, and a gust of gibbering came clear from the trolls. And then they disputed a while as to how much magic they had wished in the olden time when the grandfather of Orion was lord and earl. But when they came to a plan, this was the plan of Guhic. If we may not turn our lord Orion, he said, and his eyes be turned to Elfland, let all our parliament go up the hill to the witch Zerundarel, and put our case to her, and ask for a spell which shall be put against too much magic. And at the name of Zerundarel the 12 took heart again, for they knew that her magic was greater than the magic of flickering lights, and knew there was not a troll or thing of the night but went in fear of her broom. They took heart again, and quaffed Gnarl's heavy mead, and refilled their mugs and praised Guhic. And late in the night they all rose up together to go back to their homes, and all kept close together as they went, and sang grave old songs to affright the things that they feared, though little the light trolls care, or the will-o'-the-wisps, for the things that are grave to man. And when only one was left, he ran to his house, and the will-o'-the-wisps chased him. When the next day came, they ended their work early, for the Parliament of Earl cared not to be left on the Witches' Hill when night came, or even the gloaming. They met outside Gnarl's forge in the early afternoon, 11 of the Parliament, and they called out Gnarl. And all were wearing the clothes they were wont to wear when they went with the rest to the holy place of the Freer, though there was scarcely a soul he had ever cursed that was not blessed by her. And away they went with their old stout staves up the hill. And as soon as they could, they came to the witch's house, and there they found her sitting outside her door, gazing over the valley away, and looking neither older nor younger, nor concerned one way or the other with the coming and going of years. "We be the Parliament of Earl," they said, standing before her all in their graver clothes. "Aye," she said, "you desired magic. Has it come to you yet?" "Truly," they said, "and to spare." "There is more to come," she said. "Mother Witch," said Gnarl, "we are met here to pray you that you will give us a goodly spell which shall be a charm against magic, so that there be no more of it in the valley, for overmuch has come." "Overmuch," she said, "overmuch magic. As though magic were not the spice and essence of life, its ornament and its splendor. By my broom," said she, "I give you no spell against magic." And they thought of the wandering lights and the scarce seen gibbering things, and all the strangeness and evil that was come to their valley of Earl, and they besought her again, speaking suavely to her. "O Mother Witch," said Guhic, "there is overmuch magic indeed, and the folk that should tarry in Elfland are all over the border." "It is even so," said Gnarl. "The border is broken, and there will be no end to it. Will-o'-the-wisps should stay in the marshes, and trolls and goblins in Elfland, and we folk should keep to our own folk. This is the thought of us all. For magic, if we desired it somewhat, years ago when we were young, pertains to matters that are not for man." She eyed him silently with a cat-like glow increasing in her eyes, and when she neither spoke nor moved, Gnarl besought her again. "O Mother Witch," he said, "will you give us no spell to guard our homes against magic?" "No spell indeed," she hissed. "No spell indeed. By broom and stars and night riding. Would you rob earth of her heirloom that has come from the olden time? Would you take her treasure and leave her bare to the scorn of her comrade planets? Poor indeed were we without magic, whereof we are well stored to the envy of darkness and space. She leaned forward from where she sat and stamped her stick, looking up in Gnarl's face with her fierce, unwavering eyes. I would sooner, she said, give you a spell against water, that all the world should thirst, than give you a spell against the song of streams that evening hears faintly over the ridge of a hill, too dim for wakeful ears, a song threading through dreams, whereby we learn of old wars and lost loves of the spirits of rivers. I would sooner give you a spell against bread, that all the world should starve, than give you a spell against the magic of wheat that haunts the golden hollows in moonlight in July, through which in the warm short nights wander how many of whom man knows nothing. I would make you spells against comfort and clothing, food, shelter, and warmth. Aye, and will do it, sooner than tear from these poor fields of earth that magic that is to them an ample cloak against the chill of space, and a gay raiment against the sneers of nothingness. Go hence, to your village go, and you that sought for magic in your youth, but desire it not in your age, know that there is a blindness of spirit which comes from age, more black than the blindness of eye, making a darkness about you across which nothing may be seen, or felt, or known, or in any way apprehended. And no voice out of that darkness shall conjure me to grant a spell against magic. Hence. And as she said hence, she put her weight on her stick and was evidently preparing to rise from her seat. And at this great terror came upon all the Parliament, and they noticed at the same moment that evening was drawing in and all the valley darkening. On this high field where the witches' cabbages grew, some light yet lingered, and listening to her fierce words they had not thought of the hour. But now it was manifestly growing late, and a wind roamed past them that seemed to come over the ridges a little way off from night, and chilled them as it passed, and all the air seemed given over to that very thing against which they sought for a spell. And here they were at this hour with the witch before them, and she was evidently about to rise. Her eyes were fixed on them. Already she was partly up from her chair. There could be no doubt that before 3 moments were past, she would be hobbling amongst them with her glittering eyes peering in each one's face. They turned and ran down the hill. Chapter 31. The Cursing of Elfin Things. As the Parliament of Earl ran down the hill, they ran into the dusk of evening. Grayly it lay in the valley above the mist from the stream. But with more than the mystery of dusk, the air was heavy. Lights blinking early from houses showed that all the folk were home, and the street was deserted by everything that was human, saved when with hushed air and almost furtive step they saw their Lord Orion like a tall shadow go by, with Will-o'-the-Wisps behind him, towards the house of the trolls, thinking no earthly thoughts. And the strangeness that had been growing day by day made all the village eerie, so that with short and troubled breath the 12 old men hurried on. And so they came to the holy place of the Freer, which lay on the side of the village that was towards the Witches' Hill, and it was the hour at which he was wont to celebrate after birdsong, as they named the singing that they sang in the holy place when all the birds were home. But the Freer was not within his holy place. He stood in the cold night air on the upper step without it, his face turned towards Elfland. He had on his sacred robe with its border of purple and the emblem of gold round his neck. But the door of his holy place was shut, and his back was towards it. They wondered to see him stand thus. And as they wondered, the Freer began to intone, clear in the evening with his eyes away to the east, where already a few of the earliest stars were showing. With his head held high, he spoke as though his voice might pass over the frontier of twilight and be heard by the people of Elfland. "Cursed be all wandering things," he said, "whose place is not upon earth. Cursed be all lights that dwell in fens and in marish places. Their homes are in deeps of the marshes. Let them by no means stir from there until the last day. Let them abide in their place and there await damnation. Cursed be gnomes, trolls, elves, and goblins on land, and all sprites of the water, and fauns be accursed, and such as follow Pan, and all that dwell on the heath, being other than beasts or men. Cursed be fairies and all tales told of them, and whatever enchants the meadows before the sun is up, and all fables of doubtful authority, and the legends that men hand down from unhallowed times. Cursed be brooms that leave their place by the hearth. Cursed be witches and all manner of witcheries. Cursed be toadstool rings and whatever dances within them, and all strange lights, strange songs, strange shadows, or rumors that hint of them, and all doubtful things of the dusk, and the things that ill-instructed children fear, and old wives' tales, and things done o' midsummer nights. All these be accursed with all that leaneth toward Elfland, and all that cometh thence. Never a lane of that village, never a barn, but a will-o'-the-wisp was dancing nimbly above it. The night was gilded with them. But as the good Freer spoke, they backed away from his curses, floating further off as though a light wind blew them, and danced again after drifting a little way. This they did both before and behind him and upon either hand, as he stood there upon the steps of his holy place, so that there was a circle of darkness all round him, and beyond that circle shone the lights of the marshes and Elfland. And within the dark circle in which the Freer stood making his curses were no unhallowed things, nor were there strangenesses such as come of night, nor whispers from unknown voices, nor sounds of any music blowing here from no haunts of men. But all was orderly and seemly there, and no mysteries troubled the quiet, except such as have been justly allowed to man. And beyond that circle whence so much was beaten back by the bright vehemence of the good man's curses, the will-o'-the-wisps rioted, and many a strangeness that poured in that night from Elfland, and goblins held high holiday. For word was gone forth in Elfland that pleasant folk now had their dwelling in Earl, and many a thing of fable, many a monster of myth, had crept through that border of twilight and had come into Earl to see. And the light and false but friendly will-o'-the-wisps danced in the haunted air and made them welcome. And not only the trolls and the will-o'-the-wisps had lured these folk from their fabled land through the seldom traversed border, but the longings and thoughts of Orion, which by half his lineage were akin to the things of myth, and of one race with the monsters of Elfland, were calling to them now. Ever since that day by the frontier, when he had hovered between earth and Elfland, he had yearned more and more for his mother, and now, whether he willed it or no, His elfin thoughts were calling their kin that dwelt in the elvish fells, and at that hour when the sound of the horns blew through the frontier of twilight, they had come tumbling after it. For elfin thoughts are as much akin to the creatures that dwell in Elfland as goblins are to trolls. Within the calm and the dark of the good man's curses, the 12 old men stood silent, listening to every word. And the words seemed good to them and soothing and right, for they were over-weary of magic. But beyond the circle of darkness, amidst the glare of the will-o'-the-wisps with which all the night flickered, amidst goblin laughter and the unbridled mirth of the trolls, where old legends seemed alive and the fearfulest fables true, amongst all manner of mysteries, queer sounds, queer shapes, and queer shadows, Orion passed with his hounds eastwards towards Elfland.